I want to take you back again to the fantastic world of yesterday. I've seen things of great significance that affect our lives and destinies today. In search for answers to life's puzzling questions, I pursued my studies in one of Earth's most controversial cities, Jerusalem. Exploring such out-of-the-way places as Petra, Damascus right across Syria to Dura Europos, Cairo, hundreds of kilometres down the Nile, from Beirut right up the north of Lebanon to Baalbek, and it has given me a deeper appreciation of the people of the Middle East. Sometimes I found it difficult in remote and dangerous spots to visit the scenes of the most famous discoveries ever made. For parts of the story, I had to explore some of the greatest museums of the world, but it is fascinating and has helped me to piece together the crazy puzzle of our world today. During the colonial times, Britain, Germany, France, and other major European countries determined to parade the magnificence of the past in the museums of Europe. London, Paris, Berlin, but they raped the Nile and its fine temples, pillaged the vast plains of Mesopotamia. But in doing so, the past has been preserved. Whatever happened to the mighty city of Babylon, that queen of cities in Mesopotamia? The ancient city was unrivaled for its beauty and arrogance, noted among the 7 wonders of the world. This ongoing serial is prepared for your enjoyment, so sit back and relax as I share with you one of the most gripping stories from the ancient world. It was Halloween in 1938. America's children were dressing up and shouting, "Trick or treat!" A science fiction production had been planned for CBS radio. It was real. In fact, it was so real that 1 million sophisticated listeners panicked. Orson Welles, with his convincing resonant voice, was narrating an adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. 4 or 5 times he stated, "It's just fiction." But many missed the announcements. It was as if on-the-spot reporters were telling the story. In the country, there was havoc. Great metal monsters as tall as skyscrapers were marching through the cities, belching smoke. People were dying like flies. 7,000 soldiers were dead, burned to cinders. The sound brought terror to the people. Believe it or not, the people panicked. People rushed into the streets with wet towels over their faces to protect themselves from the gas in the city of Newmark. In New York, they fled from their apartments carrying their possessions with them. In Harlem, a man was seen peering out from his window, watching for the monsters to plough through the Hudson River. In Pittsburgh, a woman grabbed a bottle of poison. "I'd rather die this way than that." Suicides were reported. People flocked to the churches to pray. They were sure that it was the end of the world. These were not superstitious people, but educated people who had their faith in technology. Decades later, the world is still frightened. Military leaders are saying, if man continues the arms race, the human race is doomed. When Leonid Brezhnev took over the Soviet leadership in 1964, he said he completely excluded the possibility of war because it would be the end of the world. There have been many risky moments since that time, and many have concluded that nuclear weapons are obsolete. Nuclear war is obsolete. They say what we need is world government. It's imperative. But the smaller nations are kicking and screaming, making sure of their future freedoms. Whether it be nuclear or chemical warfare, as the population of the earth rises, the results will be more devastating than all human history combined. All this means it is imperative that the world build bridges, not fences. No longer can people be kept behind walls with miles of guns, dogs and mines. I shall never forget the intense scrutiny going into the communist Germany during the 80s. To turn the car into the narrow passageway that led to personal freedom was to experience Checkpoint Charlie during that time. Coming out was like the experience of releasing a wild bird from a cage. Many have died attempting that plunge for freedom that was granted me in just a few minutes. Some have escaped out of a tunnel. 57 people slipped out underneath the wall as they carted the dirt with this little cart. They've even curled up in false petrol tanks. They've flown over the wall in a balloon. One ingenious individual made a submarine and went 25 kilometres out to meet a special rendezvous. Another, a little aircraft, so small that you could fit it on the top of your car. But will the world have to have more and more East and West Berlins? We seem to trade one tyranny for another. The world has a watchdog now, 24 hours a day, from way out of space. Every day there's surveillance that can monitor every word that is spoken in privacy and even read your newspaper through the window of your own home. How can we find the answer? When will all this end? To find the answer to that question, let me take you to Berlin, to the Pergamum Museum. In this museum you will find the greatest treasures of one of the greatest powers to control the world, ancient Babylon. The thousands of glazed tiles from the walls of Babylon were brought to Germany and painstakingly pieced together inside this museum. You can actually get an idea of the famous Ishtar Gate and the processional way leading into what was thought to be an impregnable city. Well, what is it about these ruins that give us hope and courage for the future? Let me tell you the fascinating story. The cradle of civilization takes us back to the head of the Persian Gulf. 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, the city of Ur was a city in Chaldea, thriving as a centre for trade, religion and industry. They worked in gold. You can see this beautiful golden dagger. They were able to use copper. Here is a golden helmet from 2,300 years before Christ. They saw the mysteries around them, the new life, the rising sun, the movement of the stars, and they attributed it all to gods who controlled all the affairs on the earth. They were very serious about getting the gods on their side, but sadly, it always led to the destruction of human life. To appease the gods, the women of the city of Ur would engage in prostitution as a form of sacrifice. You can imagine the devastating effect that would have on families. You can see the fantastic ziggurat of Ur. Down at the base of Ur, you will find black glazed tiles, then blue and red tiles, and right up the top you will find a magnificent golden tile that must have reflected in the sun as a beautiful jewel in the desert. When Leonard Woolley excavated the city, he found the death pits where the living were buried alive with the royal dead. He found the royal death pit where the soldiers were buried alive, still with their weapons in their hands. When Lady Shubad died, she was buried with 60 of her attendants. They were buried alive. The harpist still had his fingers across the strings. In many ways they were very clever, living in 2-story houses with 14 rooms around a beautiful courtyard. Their artisans were able to produce exquisite work. Look at this beautiful dinner plate. And here is an electrum spearhead made of the mixing of silver and gold, the ram as if it's caught in a bush, weights that have been tested by computer and found to be absolutely perfect. Here is a temple officer from thousands of years before the time of Christ. So we know what they look like. And surprisingly, the further we go back into recordable antiquity, we find that there was intelligence. These were no hairybacks. From all these discoveries, at least we know one thing. We now know what the father of both the Jews and the Arabs looked like, because Ur was Abraham's hometown. The Bible says that God made an agreement with Abraham at a time when nations were struggling for survival and dominance. And it's amazing to see how that promise worked out. God said, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations." He was told to leave the idolatry of Ur, which amounted to sex worship, and go to another land where he would have freedom to worship the true God. One night he was told to look at the stars. He was told that this would be the number of his offspring. It is so sad to see the struggle for survival still going on after thousands of years as Jews and Arabs battled for land and for freedoms. We can be certain that the Bible story of Abraham is no myth, as again and again the story has been confirmed by the discoveries made during the last 2 centuries. In fact, Albright, the father of modern archaeology, once said, "We must revise considerably our ideas of the Hebrew patriarch. When we learn that his early years were spent in such sophisticated surroundings, he was a citizen of a highly organized civilization. The houses themselves bespoke comfort and even luxury." One of Abraham's direct descendants is the hero of our story today. He was a Jew. He was a teenager who knew the worst in anguish. At about 16 years of age, he watched the armies of Babylonia draw the net on Jerusalem, and Nebuchadnezzar, the famous king of Babylon, dragged Daniel to a foreign land as a captive slave. Daniel's story is one of the greatest stories ever told in human history. It is a story of intrigue, of courage, and fearless integrity. Daniel was given information by visions that have proven absolutely true in our day and show us with incredible accuracy what is yet to happen in our world. The incredible thing, a century before the digs began to reveal the records hidden in the ground, scholars doubted everything Daniel said. They put him down as a fraud. But last century, an incredible chain of events happened. Babylon was found. Nebuchadnezzar had written his name on thousands of the bricks of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's personal letters had been discovered. A Babylonian record known as the Babylonian Chronicle even told of the capture of Jerusalem, just as Daniel had stated in his amazing story. I came here to war-torn Beirut to see an inscription left by Nebuchadnezzar. He marched his armies down the coast of Palestine, so there is no doubt that Daniel's story is true and his predictions have been fulfilled in minute detail. You can just imagine the constant stream of busy people dressed in imported costumes making their way down the processional way into the city for worship, shopping, or just living. Their gods were their source of courage for the future, and they worship them with all the pomp and ceremony that man-made religion built on superstition requires. The Sirish is a strange god. You can see it has a horn, it has the paws of a lion, and yet the back legs, you see the claws of a bird. But the main god for Babylon was Marduk, the sun god, depicted as a powerful bull, similar to the ancient Egyptian idea of the Apis bulls. The city of Babylon was laid out beautifully. There, you remember, they had the hanging gardens for the princess who missed the mountains of Media so much. And of course, the fantastic temple dedicated to Marduk, the sun. The Euphrates River flowed right through Babylon. The walls around the city were 90 feet high. Imagine it. If you've ever looked up in a high tree, 90 feet high. And the walls were 10 to 14 miles around and never overthrown. The foundations of the walls of Babylon have been discovered. The Lion of Babylon symbolizes the pride and arrogance of the place. The enemy are shown as prey for a hungry lion. Herodotus, the famous Greek traveller, tells us of an interesting custom that they had here in Babylon. When it came to marriage, they would auction all the girls on a set day. And all the girls would come in, and you would know that if you were going to have a certain girl, you would have to have plenty of money. The Babylonians were clever mathematicians. As you look at your watch, you'll notice 60 minutes for the hour, 60 seconds for a minute. And there's 24 hours in a day. And as you look at a circle, it's divided into 360 degrees. This all came from ancient Babylonia. Their special number was the number 6. They inherited much of their religious practices from other nations, adopting and changing things as they wished, but much the same as any pagan religions. Many gods to explain the mysteries of the world around them, and many priests, and much ritual that revolved around fertility and sexuality. So in this setting, the God of Daniel brought hope to a nation of Jewish slaves by revealing the future. Listen to Daniel's amazing story. Before the sun shimmered on the Euphrates that morning, the palace literally bristled. Nebuchadnezzar was in his royal bedroom, but the atmosphere was electric. The king's advisors had been brought in. You can just imagine them stepping down from their chariots in their colourful robes and hurrying across the courtyard, the cobblestone courtyard, into the palace. Why have they been called? Has there been war? Is there a revolution? Rumour had it that the king had spent a restless night. He had been troubled by a strange dream. By the way, all this is recorded in Daniel's record. Well, the trouble was the king had forgotten the dream, but he knew it was very important. And despite the early hour, the chief astrologers and magicians and sorcerers had been all called in. These advisors anticipated that it would be difficult, but after all, they were supposed to be the master of dreams. Tell your servants the dream, they said, and we will interpret it. But their confidence vanished when Nebuchadnezzar replied, "If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble." They tried to reason with the king. There's not a man on the earth who can do what the king asks. No king has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. "Frauds," said the king. He was angry, and he decided that he would execute them all. And his chief captain, Arioch, was hastening to obey. Well, the custom was at the time to educate the most promising captives from foreign lands. Daniel was in training as an advisor for Jerusalem, and Arioch arrived and announced that he must die. Daniel was desperate. "Give me time! Give me time!" At that time, Daniel went into the king and asked for time. So the king gave him a little time. The king was desperate, you see, and Daniel was desperate, and that night Daniel prayed to God as a man on death row. The God of Daniel did not fail him. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. The answer God gave has been in history books for hundreds of years. It has been so accurate. Any honest person looking at the answer given to Daniel cannot run from it. Quickly, he was brought in to the presence of the king, and this novice began to explain. "I am able to share with you the story. Are you able to tell me meaning of the vision? There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and makes known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the last days. For people who are desperate to know the future, there is only one reliable source. As I have discovered from different peoples around the globe as they try and understand what is going to happen next in our world, there is really only one place that you can go to, that you can trust. And that is the Bible. Oh, King, you saw in your dream a great image. The image had a head of gold. It had arms of silver, thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet, strangely, of clay mixed in with iron. Well, the king was overjoyed. That's it, that's it. What does that mean today, after 2,500 years? You see, in 150 words, God stretched out the main course of history from Babylon's day, 600 years before Christ, to the climax of Earth's history. In the dream, God literally pulled back the curtain of time. King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel found themselves looking down the centuries. Breathlessly, the king waited. What did it all mean? The God of heaven revealed, Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom is the head of gold. Now, gold was a fitting symbol for ancient Babylon. Every power who conquered Babylon took hoards of gold as treasure. Now, if Daniel had just been a clever politician, he would have stopped right there, but courageously he pushed on. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Now the smile was gone from Nebuchadnezzar's face. You see, the letters of Nebuchadnezzar have been found, and they show him to be a very proud monarch. For example, one says, "These portals for the astonishment of multitudes of people, with beauty I adorned, may it last forever." But Daniel said, a second kingdom, inferior. And then he said a third kingdom of brass would come, and a fourth kingdom of iron. Then the strangest thing, the iron kingdom would divide. And whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of iron and part of clay, the kingdom shall be divided. The world would never be ruled by one nation after the fourth kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction was instant. He was furious. He ordered an image to be made 90 feet high and placed it out on the plain beside Babylon. And he called all the nations to come and worship. They were going to worship the image as a symbol that his kingdom would rule forever. Nebuchadnezzar didn't count on the Jewish captives refusing to worship his symbol of eternal power. There they were. When all others were kneeling in submission, 3 Jewish captives stood out like uncut wheat. "You will go into the fire," Nebuchadnezzar warned. "In fact, we will make it 7 times hotter." They said, "Our God is able to deliver us." 3 men were cast into that fire. It was so intense, those who cast them in were destroyed by the heat. In astonishment, the king looked into the flames and shouted, "I see 4 men loose, and the 4th is like the Son of God." Nebuchadnezzar had defied the God of heaven. Years before, another Hebrew prophet had predicted Babylon's demise, even though it was the greatest city on earth. God had spoken, "Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall shepherds make their fold there, but the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there." how did the prophet know the Arabs would still be there, but the Babylonians, the mighty conquerors, would be gone? Today, as you look over the old city of Babylon, it's just rubble. A temple tower that had 58 million bricks is gone. There are just pools, lairs for wild animals, and nests where once stood the greatest city on earth. Let me tell you of the last night in Babylon. Belshazzar was in charge. He was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. He felt recklessly secure. The scholars were puzzled when they discovered that Nabonidus was the king of Babylon at the time. So Daniel was considered to be quite wrong. Imagine their surprise when they discovered Babylonian records showing that Belshazzar was a co-ruler at the time. Daniel was right after all. Well, Belshazzar had a feast where he called in 1,000 of the lords, probably in this banquet hall. He decided to defy the God of Daniel, bring in the sacred cups taken in the raid of the Jewish temple. He was in the act of drinking from the vessels in defiance when suddenly a bloodless hand began to write on the palace wall. Daniel records the experience. He said that Belshazzar's knees began to knock. He lost control of his bowels. But the smell was nothing like the fear in his heart as he heard his doom pronounced. Daniel was called in. The message said, Mene, tekel upharsin, your kingdom is finished. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel's words had hardly finished reverberating around the walls of the palace when a messenger cries, the city is taken and we are lost. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persians had struck on the only weak point of Babylon, the river. The Persians had actually diverted the river upstream, and the soldiers were ordered to take the city along the riverbank. There was the river with the brass gates along the side. They felt absolutely secure. They hadn't even bothered to lock the gates the night of the feast. Strangely, 150 years before Cyrus had been born, a Hebrew prophet had predicted that the power to conquer Babylon would come through those brass river gates. It's just astounding. How could the Hebrew prophet know the future so well? The critics used to say it's just a story, but that's no longer the case. A scribe had recorded the fall of Babylon just like Daniel said. 2,500 years is a long time to wait for the story to be confirmed. The arrogant soldiers of Babylon were helpless when Daniel's God had spoken. The Cyrus cylinder is an incredible confirmation of the story of the fall of Babylon by the Medes and Persians. But today, Tehran is the capital of Persia. Reaching out for Western trade, Iran has a society that is undergoing one of its greatest historical changes. For the wealthy, there's videotapes, cable television, satellite, TV. If Iran is closed to the world comes in to Iran. Today there are parks and gardens, and they're appearing where couples can cautiously court, but without holding hands. Many women are dispensing with the cumbersome chador and wearing simple headscarves. Teenage girls sport mini manturas, short Islamic dresses with flashes of colour from bandanas under their scarves. Bright new tandem buses can be seen, washed every day, rushing along the busy streets while shops and showrooms spill over with expensive goods. Cars and designer fabrics and appliances to satisfy the thirst for 20th century living, Coca-Cola and Caterpillar tractors are back, and the financial system is slowly changing. The peacock throne of Persia, stolen from India centuries ago, reminds us of the opulence of the late Shah of Iran. The jewels of gold and wealth were absolutely incredible. And diamonds? The Shah boasted of the largest diamond in the world. How would a crown like that match your wardrobe, do you think? But one word from the secret police and your days were numbered. Well, in ancient times, the Persian kings set up their own power base in a city of their choice. For Darius and Xerxes, they built Persepolis into a fantastic treasure city. You can see the graves of Darius and Artaxerxes, still there after thousands of years. These were real people. The story of Daniel is talking about people who really lived. It was later destroyed, the city of Persepolis, by Alexander the Great, out of revenge, because the Persians had destroyed Athens years before. It was during the Persian rule that Daniel was thrown down into the den of lions. The Persian princes didn't want a Jew with so much power, but the same God who revealed the future to Daniel was sure to make sure that Daniel was untouched by those hungry beasts. Daniel had said that the Persian Empire would go. No one could have guessed that the ragged West could have produced a power that would cast its language from one end of the world to the other. It was time for the kingdom of brass to come. Another kingdom of brass shall bear rule over all the earth. Alexander the Great, a very short man, not even 2 meters, was afraid that his father would leave him nothing to conquer, but he swept across the world as lightning through a barley patch. He defeated Darius III in 331 BC at the Battle of Arbela, and the world was never the same again. Up here on the Acropolis, the city of the gods, the Greeks proudly built the temple of Athena Parthenos. This unique temple was built to celebrate the incredible victory over the Persians. Alexander believed that he was led by the God who actually controlled the sun. His end was certain, however, when he emerged from an ancient Egyptian shrine and published to all the world that he had become divine. He failed to see that he was only a man, not God. While Greece today still remembers its past glory, there's one thing sure: no man will ever proclaim themselves as God. Athens is a fascinating kaleidoscope of people and change and interest. But in the past, the Greeks held the world over 100 years, but the story in the theatres was a story of the gathering storm of the clouds of war. It was time for the fourth power that Daniel predicted to come. Even Athena, who was worshipped on the top of the mountain here at the Acropolis, could not stop the divine decree. Daniel had said a fourth power would come and rule the world. The fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, he said. Well, at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, the Greeks were defeated. The impossible had happened. The soldiers of a single city had begun their march across the civilized world. A single city with soldiers that were able to control the world? Rome believed that it was the umbilical cord of the world. Called upon so often to make peace, it became the champion of law and order. It extended its power over the nations as it was called for assistance. It didn't actually plan to rule the world. It was called in to help quell the riots and insurrections, but it brought with us the rule of iron. It was during the rule of Rome that a man was born. He was born at the time of Augustus Caesar. He was baptized at the time of Tiberius Caesar. And he died on a Roman cross. And he was buried with a Roman seal. And a guard of Romans guarded the tomb. But no empire could hold him in the tomb. A Hebrew prophet had predicted that when Messiah came, he would rise from the dead. At first, Rome tried to obliterate the teachings of Jesus, but persecution only spread his name. Some were covered with tar and lit up as torches in the fantastic places of games. Later, the Colosseum was built as an example of the fantastic games that were held in Rome. Here at the Circus Maximus, 80,000 died for their faith. It was the racetrack of Rome. But Daniel had said that Rome's time was measured. He said, as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Edward Gibbon, the great historian, tells us that by 476 AD, Rome could no longer control the pagan tribes on its borders. But no world power has ever taken Rome's place. Just as Daniel said, after the fourth world power, the world would divide. Yes, we have the Alemanni, the Germans, the Franks, the French, the Saxons, who became the English, the Visigoths, the Spanish, the Burgundians, the Swiss, the Lombards, Italians, the Suevi, the Portuguese, and there were the Heruli, Vandals, Ostrogoths. They've vanished. But Daniel said they would not hold together. They shall not cleave. Here was a prophet from ancient times stating that the nations would never unite again. So many have tried, but you can't make a Frenchman into an Englishman or an Italian into a German. Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th centuries tried to unify the world. Charles V in the 10th century, Napoleon in the 18th century, Kaiser William in the 19th century, even Adolf Hitler in the 20th century. But God had spoken, they shall not hold together. Napoleon was an avid Bible student who understood Daniel, and his prediction was sure. At Waterloo, he stated, God is too great for me. He admitted it. He had deliberately set out to overthrow the prophecy. Daniel said they would try to hold together by marriage, but it didn't work. The great wars have been really a giant family struggle with all the heads of state related to each other. They've tried peace treaties, trade treaties, but it's like trying to hold the nations together, kicking and screaming in a wet paper bag. It really is amazing. There has been 4 world empires. Why not 5? Why not 6 or 10? No, there's been the head of gold, Babylon. Silver, the arms of silver, the thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. If you want to disprove the Bible, all you would have to do is find one more empire after Rome. Up to a few years ago, skeptics said that Daniel must have been written after the events. But since the discovery of Daniel's prediction 100 years before the time of Christ, there is no doubt it is indisputable. Hippolytus, the 3rd century writer, said, Rejoice, blessed Daniel, thou hast not been in error. All these things have come to pass. Already the iron rules. Already it subdues and breaks in pieces. That comes from the Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 5, page 210. All history agrees with Daniel. No atheist or agnostic who looks at the facts can discredit the Bible. It is 100% accurate, 100% sure. There is one final statement that Daniel makes that really interests me. You see, he takes us one step into the future. What will happen next for our crazy world? Will there be a mad dictator? Now, I'm not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet, but I want to make a prediction. By tonight, you are going to find yourself looking into a mirror. And you're going to see in that mirror an image. And you're going to ask yourself a question. Are we in the days of Babylon? Well, no. Of Persia? No, of course not. What about Greece? No, Greece no longer rules the world. Then Rome? No, Rome does not rule the world. We are in the days of the divided world. Then you are going to ask another question. What will happen next? What did Daniel say? Now that's the subject of the next program in the series. This series could be the most significant you have ever heard.